You should have predicted 5 years ago that there's going to be cyber war. Welcome to Life of a CISO. I'm Dr. Eric Cole, your host, and we'll be taking you on a journey each week on what it takes to be a CISO and what are solutions that you can implement today if you are currently a Chief Information Security Officer or if you want to be one in the future. This is Life of a CISO. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You know what time it is, right? It's time for Life of a CISO with yours truly. Dr. Eric Cole is in the house, and it is my pleasure and honor to spend some time with you virtually. I hope you are doing awesome. I hope all your dreams are coming true, and you know what I'm going to say next? I hope you're being world-class, right? It's all about world-class. Also want to mention, we have some new cohorts of the CISO cert running. I tell you, it's cranking up. We are getting such amazing results. I'd love to work with you to change your world, change your life, and make you a world-class CISO. You can go to secure-anchor.com/CISO, find out more details, or you can just email me, ecole@secure-anchor.com. My team actually monitors that, so they'll forward it to Kaylee or one of my amazing team members, and we'll get you started. 6-month program, 40 hours of knowledge transfer, 6 months of group coaching with me, one of my favorite parts. It's one of the best feedback we get from students, and a private peer group. So I'd love to have you. I'd love to help you. I'd love to take your career and your life to that next level. What I always like to start off with is a pattern or something I've been seeing in my private coaching calls this week. And one of the things, and it's always funny, I joke with my private clients, I'm like, do you guys talk to each other? Because it seems like every week they all have the same or similar problem. But you know what the reality is? It's the lens. It seems like I always spend time researching because I always want to give max effort, 100+% to everything I do. So it's one of those when I start seeing patterns and stuff, I put that lens on, and then I think I see that in all the different folks. So we sort of have these patterns going. But what's come up a lot this week isn't it's funny, 3 of the 5 calls I did recently, I always start off with, give me an update. How are things going? What's working? What's not working? And I kid you not, the first words out of 3 of the 5 folks were, Eric, I wish I had more time. I wish there was more time in the day or the week. There's so much I want to do. And it was to be honest, most of it was from a positive of, I have so many things I want to do and accomplish. I just wish I can get more done. There was more time. Now, let's just be honest. There is no more time, right? 24 hours in a day, we all get it, right? Everybody gets the same amount of time. So going in and wishing for something that you cannot change, right, is sort of a little silly. It's like, I wish gravity didn't apply to me. Now, I guess if we were doing this many, many years ago, it'd be like, that's the reality. But now with space travel and moon travel and all these very rich people flying people to space, I guess you could live in space, right? But for the most part, saying, I wish gravity didn't apply to me is not really a practical thing. However, I want to dissect this thing down because time is an interesting thing. Yes, somebody came up with a concept of a second, a minute, and an hour, and somebody just came up with this concept of 24 hours in a day. Now, yes, I know some of your scientific or those into astronomy and stuff like that go, oh no, Eric, it's based on rotation and all these other factors. Yeah, but couldn't they have come up and decided that 3 seconds were a second? And couldn't they have decided that 40 seconds was in an hour and there's 20 hours in a day instead of 24? I mean, if you look at it at some level, the concept of measurement is sort of an arbitrary thing. And when I bring it up that way, because it's how you use it. I know sometimes when I'm just in flow state, when I'm just in mojo, I can get things done very quickly. And other times, if I'm not in flow state and I'm fighting or I have some issues or problems or other, it takes me 3 or 4 times as long. So the first concept that's important is to track critical things that you need to do and only do them when you're at a peak level, when you can get into that flow state very easily. And I'll give you an example this week with doing these videos, because I'm starting to travel. I think it's no secret that we pre-record. And usually I only record when I'm in the moment, when I'm in flow. I think the studio's always ready. I just pop in like I'm doing now and I knock it out once. But because I was traveling and I knew I needed to get a couple recorded, I did something I never did, which I forced it. I just wasn't there. I had some things going on, a couple little fires, a couple little issues that I was worrying about and things like that. I just weren't there. And what I realized is, and like I said, I'm one take wonder when it comes to these. That particular day where I forced it, I kept stopping and had to restart and restart. And what happened was, this is 30 minutes, and it normally takes me 30 minutes because I do it once. I'm an hour and 40 minutes in, and I still don't have a segment done, and then I'm getting frustrated and angry, and I ended up just walking away and do that as a lesson learned. I'm never, ever going to do that again. But that's an example where if I wait for the right time, I can get it done very quick. And if I force it, it's going to take 3 or 4 or 5 times and not get it done. So it's important that throughout your day, you recognize when are your optimal flow times. I'm a morning person, so I prefer not to have things booked, typically 8 to 10 and usually 12 to 2. That's when I'm max performance. We don't do calls then. We don't do other things then. If we have to, we can, but that's when I work on the business, when I work on videos, when I record new content, when I work with, because that's when I can maximize. Once again, not putting down, but you can do a phone call and a Zoom call when you're not max, right? Because you just got to go through stuff, right? You don't have to be optimal. If you're recording a keynote for a client, if you're putting together a strategic plan for your business, if you're figuring out the budget, that's stuff you don't want to do in a non-optimal state. So it's important as we go through the day that we're sort of careful with what are our optimal, non-optimal times. And if you just tracked for 2 or 3 days, you'd figure it out really, really quickly when you're optimal, when you're not optimal. I usually get up between 4 or 5 a.m. So by 4:35, I'm not optimized. I can do some calls. I can get some things done. I can do stuff. But my rule of thumb is I never make any decisions. I never sign any contracts, and I never do any critical work after 3 p.m. Now, if reports are due, you sort of got to make it happen. And in those cases, I put a team around me. So sometimes with our expert witness, we have reports due at midnight, and sometimes it's midnight California. So yes, it's 3 a.m. East Coast. And I don't like to operate that way, but some of these attorneys are super busy. So it sometimes comes down to the wire where we're doing final edits, reports, updates at 8 or 9 p.m. East Coast. In those cases, I can't tell them no, I can't ignore it. So what I do then is I increase the support staff around me. Normally I have one person on my team that works with me. I ask 2 other members to work late. I give them a heads up. And then I have 3 people basically watching, reading, checking, and validating, because I know that's not my optimal time, and I'm more prone to make mistakes. So if you just be more aware as you go through days and weeks, and it's not going to take a long time. You'll figure this out very, very quickly. You'll then be able to optimize and maximize. Now, other thing, and this, just work with me here. I'm going to go a little out there on you. Why in the world do we have to stick to the conventional meaning of a day? I joke, on a given day, I actually have 3 days. So I break my days down into segments. So from 4 to 10 That's one day. That's Eric, optimize, getting set, planning. During that day, and you can call it a sub day or whatever makes you feel comfortable, that's when I exercise, I read, I journal, I plan, I work on the business, I record videos, I do all those things. Just want to take a quick break. I hope you're enjoying the show. I have this free webinar that I would love for you to check out if you want to become a world-class CISO. Then from 10 to 4 is my next day, or my next sub day, which is all about meetings, teams, projects, status reports, status updates, client, Zoom calls, all those. And then from 4 to 9 is typically the third, which is sort of the wind down. That's when I read, meditate, debrief on the day, and do some planning and things like that. So now I joke because my week, I basically have 21 days. So now if you go in and say you can't change time, which is true, but if you change the concept of a day and you use the optimization techniques that I talked about, why can't you accomplish what most people do in 3 days in 1 day? If you're planning and focused and clear, you'd be amazed of how much more you can get done. And people tell me that all the time. I get the comment on a constant basis. My team members, when we hire new team members, I'm very careful on the vetting process and up to speed, because if you're not used to my pace, I can burn people out, right? If you don't love and excited. So I'm hiring people that really love and engage with cybersecurity. Even if they're in a different business area, they're like, yeah, I'm really interested in cyber. I want to learn more. I want to do that, because then I don't burn them out. I actually excite, energize, and they love that pace that I operate at. But when I work with executives or others, they always tell me all the time, man, Eric, you get done in 3 or 4 days what most people get done in a day. Yeah, because it's all about optimization. I understand my peak times, and then I view the world differently. I don't view a day as 24 hours. I view a day as 6 to 8 hours. So I essentially have 3 days in one if you take away the sleeping component of it. Once again, I'm just giving you ideas and thoughts. Remember, the goal of my life of a CISO is not for you to believe everything I say, not for you to take it on face value, but to keep an open mind. Keep an open mind. And my sole objective every time I record one of these is that you listen to it for 30 minutes and you end the 30 minutes thinking differently than the way you started. That you have a different view of the world than when we started our discussion. And let me just give you one final hint, and then I'm going to go in to today's CISO component. The other part applies to CISO too, but a little more on the CISO strategy piece. Is it's interesting. Your brain wants to protect you. So when it senses things that could inherently change or alter how you operate or how you think, it gets very defensive. It wants to protect you. Your brain doesn't want to change because it wants to keep you safe, even though change is better for you in the long run. So the cases where you get very defensive, the times where you're like, that's just garbage. I don't know what Eric's doing. That's not working. That's not legit. That's not valuable. Those are where you want to pay attention. Those are the areas where you need to change the most. I constantly, when I love going to seminars and talking with people. I have coaches and all that. And when we're talking and it's like, yeah, and I'm agreeing and say, yeah, absolutely. Those are things, minor tweaks and adjustments. But when we're talking or they're saying something that I get triggered, where I'm like, there, you mean, and you get very, I'm like, oh, that's where I need to grow. That's where I need to learn. That's where I need to change. So just keep an open mind and just always look at things differently. Because remember the fundamental principle. If you keep doing things the way you've done them, your life will not change, right? They're always going to be the same. So if you want a different life, if you want to become world-class, if you want to go to the next level, then you need to start doing things differently. You need to start changing how you do things. The other thing, and once again, I don't think it's any surprise we pre-record these, so when you listen to this, it might be a couple weeks or there might be some very interesting things going on. But right now, this week, I did a lot of news stories on cyber attack from Russia, right? Because there's been some different warnings. It's funny. I'm getting so many texts from friends and family members. Do I have to be worried? Do I have to empty out my bank account? Do I have to go in and put money under my mattress, right? And get cash and all that other stuff. I'm like, no, we're good, right? We're good. But what I'm realizing is there's a lot of people, and I get these calls from CISOs and CEOs and others. What I'm realizing is there's a lot of people that still don't understand what cybersecurity is. Because cybersecurity, if it's done correctly, should anticipate these types of things. You should anticipate that there's going to be attacks. Now, I'm not saying 5 years ago you should have anticipated that Russia was going to attack the Ukraine, but you could have easily 6, 9, 12 months ago sort of predicted it if you look at the politics a little bit about how it's working. But the point is irrelevant. What's important is you should have predicted 5 years ago that there's going to be cyber war and predicted that there's going to be cyber attacks and that cyber is going to be a part of traditional warfare, right? All the writing was on the wall. So you should have proactively identified those various threats and components and put measures in place to protect against it. It always sort of surprises me where so many companies and entities or CISOs treat security as this reactive thing. Like after Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack, everyone's like, what do we have to do about ransomware? I'm like, why weren't you addressing ransomware? It's not like ransomware was a new concept. And to me, what it comes down to is we're forgetting what cybersecurity is. So I figured I haven't done this in a while. It's always a good refresher on what is the definition of cybersecurity. And I always love doing this because it amazes me. It's something that we all know the term, but very few of us have actually thought about what does it mean. I know folks that have worked in cyber for 10 years. I know folks that I would consider world-class cybersecurity or forensic experts. And when I ask them a simple question of give me a one-sentence definition of cybersecurity, they struggle. Right? You know, Eric, you know what it is. Yeah, but I'm asking you. Yeah, it's the cyber stuff. I'm like, yeah, but what's the definition? So the definition solves a lot of things because it shows us what the focus is. The definition of cybersecurity is understanding, managing, and mitigating risk of our critical assets being disclosed, altered, or denied access. And the last part is the complete definition that ties into the 3 goals of cybersecurity: confidentiality, integrity, or availability. But if we wanted to keep it for executives even generic, I do cybersecurity is understanding, managing, and mitigating the risk of our critical assets being impacted. Right? So we can group that CIA at a higher level if we need to. But if we really break it down, cybersecurity is really concerned with 3 main things. It's our critical assets. It's the threats to the critical assets, which is one component of risk. Right? Risk is the probability of loss, components of threats and vulnerabilities. Threats are the potential for harm, and vulnerabilities are weaknesses that allow those threats to manifest themselves. So world-class CISOs have a sheet, I always say in their office or on their desktop, but really world-class CISOs have this memorized. They're looking at it and using so much it's memorized. And what it is, it's a piece of paper, or you can use electronic if you want. A PowerPoint slide works, and you essentially break it into 3 columns. Now the trick, you get 1 piece of paper or 1 slide. The next trick, 12-point font. So the point of this exercise is not to cover everything. Now, to create this, you might need to brainstorm, right? I have some people going, Eric, I have no idea, so great. Come up with 50 pieces of critical data, 50 critical business processes for your organization, come up with 50 threats, and come up with 50 vulnerabilities. Then, once you do that brainstorming, this is not the final work product, but if you're struggling, do that. And then pick the top 5 out of each of those. So the ultimate end product is one piece of paper with 3 columns, where the first column is, what are the 5 most critical assets to your business? If you want to think business process, I like that because it integrates the entire ecosystem, which is helpful. So what are the 5 most critical business processes or data stores? That's the first column. The second column is, what are the threats that would have the highest likelihood of causing harm to those critical business processes? And then the third column is, what are the vulnerabilities that would allow those threats to cause damage to the critical assets? So the CIA confidentiality, integrity, availability is baked in. We're just not explicitly focusing on it at this level because this is your CISO target sheet. This is your CISO focus. Now, important, prioritization is key. You can't fix everything because you have limited budget and limited resources. I always have folks, and this is one of the big differences between world-class engineers and world-class CISOs. World-class security engineers want to be protected and secure, 100%. Even though we know it doesn't exist, right? They want that goal, and they think that all resources, all money should be spent on cybersecurity. So when you tell them that there are certain risks we're going to accept or not going to fix or we're going to potentially allow it to happen, that makes them very uncomfortable. They don't like that because world-class security engineers, world-class means they do it as close to perfect as possible. And world-class security engineers view anything below that as substandard and that breaches are unacceptable. That's why they're world-class security engineers. That's what you want in a world-class security engineer. And that's the reason why you never, ever, ever, under any circumstance, let a world-class security engineer be a CISO. Because that's not the reality. Just like in any business, cybersecurity is a business, and we need to recognize that we're going to have to prioritize. We don't have unlimited resources. There's going to be some risk we're not going to be able to address. There's going to be some exposures we're not going to be able to fix. And we're going to accept the fact that, yes, attacks can happen. That's the world-class CISO mindset. You want both, but they're different. And that's why it's so important to make sure that world-class CISOs think differently than world-class security engineers. So when I go in and do these exercises, the 2 biggest issues that I see is, one, they don't get executive involvement for the first column. Let's face it. When it comes to the top 5 business processes for your organization, CISOs and security engineers don't know that. Only the executives know that. Only the CEO and COO know that. Now, you want to make it as easy for them as possible. So if you just go in blind and say, tell me what the most critical assets are, that's not fair. They're going to stumble around. They're going to feel uncomfortable, and you don't want to do that. But what if you worked with IT and the business unit? So you went to IT and said, can you tell me all of the technology and which business processes support it? And then you go to each business unit and say, can you tell me the business processes that you rely on to run your business? And then you create a superset of that list, and then you identify what you believe to be the top 10 or 12. So now you go to the executives and say, okay, we did the work for you. Here's a superset of all the business processes in the organization. We believe that these are the top 12. And it doesn't have to be 12. It's not a magic number, 15, whatever you want. And we need you to pick the top 5. Now, if you have a partner like in the COO that will work with you and you can whittle it down to 5, that's great. Make sure, though, it's not a biased COO. What I mean by that is sometimes COOs come from a business unit, and even though they're supposed to be operating officer for the entire company, right, they sort of have a bias. We ran into this with one client where it was a merger of 3 different companies, and the COO was from one of those companies, and he didn't even realize he was doing it. It was not intentional, but he'd always be biased towards that one business unit. So you just want to be careful of that. But if you have an unbiased COO, they can help you, and then you can even go to the CEO and say, this is what we believe to be the top 5. Do you agree? That has to come from the executive team. Now, good news. Unless you're doing major reorganization of the business, unless you're going in and acquiring, selling off assets or things like that, your critical business processes shouldn't change. So that's something you check once a year, but it really doesn't change. And then if there's a what we call critical business event, an acquisition, merger, buy, sell, reorg, you then recheck it after that. So yes, you do have to get executive support and buy-in, but it's not that often, and you verify it once a year. Then threats and vulnerabilities, you can go in and work with IT and security. So you, the people that typically work for you, you can go in and figure out the top threats. Now, once again, the reason why I like the 50, because when I've done this exercise, what happens is when you say, okay, what are the top threats? What are the top vulnerabilities? They'll come up with the 5 or 6, and 3 or 4 are probably belong there. But there's a couple that they didn't think about because they didn't think out of the box. They didn't push themselves out of that comfort zone. So by telling the team, listen, step 1 of this exercise is I want you to come up with 50 threats to the organization and 50 vulnerabilities. Now, what will happen is typically the first 20 to 25 are pretty easy. You push them really hard and they could probably get 30 to 35. And they're like, listen, we just can't get any more. There's no more than 30. Yes, there are. And what I find is when you push out of that comfort zone and you really get creative, that's when you really get the awareness. And most of the time, the last 10 that you come up with usually make the list. Usually 1 or 2 of those make the list because they were so obvious you never thought about them. So you then want to have your 5 or 6 top threats and then your 5 or 6 top vulnerabilities. And the most important thing as a CISO is make sure that the last column, the vulnerabilities, are root cause. What I mean by that is you shouldn't put on this CISO, this is strategic high level. You shouldn't put on this list, apply the new patch for attack X. That's not strategic, that's tactical. What you should put as the vulnerability is implement corporate-wide centralized automated patch management. The vulnerability is lack, right, of, I was jumping ahead to the solution. The vulnerability shouldn't be missing patch for specific exploit. The vulnerability should be lack of corporate automated patch management. And then, of course, the solution is installing or updating patch management. Now, here's the cool part. By doing that strategic focus, that one pager, the CISO, you now know what you have to focus on for the next 3 to 6 months. It's the 5 vulnerabilities, right? Those are the top exposures to your company that must be fixed. And then you fix them and you repeat that last column. So the first column, critical assets, you review once a year or when there's a critical business changing event. The threats, you review quarterly. Normally, they change a little bit, but they're not going to change that often. And then the vulnerabilities, you review after you fix them. Typically, depending on the list and the resources you have, those should be able to be fixed every 3 to 6 months. So now as a CISO, you essentially in a year, you have 2 to 4 cadences where, okay, for the next 3 months, we focus on these. We then fix them. We then reevaluate threats, recheck, create new vulnerabilities, second cadence or second quarter. And then you follow in that order. Now, because you're always aware of impact to the business and the threats, you're now fixing those issues before they ever happen. So now you're fixing ransomware a year and a half before Colonial happened. You're fixing threats to critical data or attack vectors before there's a cyber war. So now you're staying ahead of the attack vector and being more proactive. So world-class CISOs have a single page. World-class CISOs know their critical assets, the threats and the vulnerabilities. They prioritize. They review the critical assets yearly. They review the threats quarterly. And the vulnerabilities basically become the cadence of what they focus on and fix. And then once that's done, they redo those vulnerabilities. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Life of a CISO. And I wish you an amazing week. Be world-class. And I'll see you next week on Life of a CISO.